that it made the events of October 27th so cruel, because the perfection of the Sabbath was obviously obliterated. But I experienced a bit of that taste of that future state, where it wasn't just the Jews in prayer and in solidarity together, but it was the whole human family coming together in love and in solidarity. I remember when I was little and I asked my mother, learning first about the Holocaust as a little child, and I asked what any of our kids would ask. I had never, as a little kid, and I saw whatever movie we saw or whatever experience, and I asked her, could this ever happen here? And my mother, I'll never forget this long pause. And she said, Jonah, I don't think so, because what's different about the United States from the Weimar Republic in Germany is our diversity. We're not the only minority here that's marginalized. We're Black and brown and Asian, Latino, we're Muslim, we're Christian. And all the more so since the early 70s, when my mother made that observation 50 years later, we're a much more diverse country, which is challenging, it's hard. And yet, I do believe that our safety comes in our solidarity when marginalized peoples come together, when Jews understand Islamophobia, when Muslims understand anti-Black racism, when Black people understand what it is to be a Uyghur, when Uyghurs and the list goes on. So that's my thesis for our time together, which again, I bore witness when I came to be with you and I heard the Black leaders of Pittsburgh, the Muslim leaders of Pittsburgh, speak to not only their words of solidarity, but raising money for impacted families, for healthcare and for funeral costs, talking about the ways in which they would literally stand vigil outside the synagogues. So the text that I brought is my favorite prophetic text, Isaiah chapter 58. I know that there's many, many levels of religious observance on this call. So some of you may know the source incredibly well. Some of you may be hearing it for the first time, but we'll all kind of move forward together. But just take a second and post in the chat, because I want to get folks kind of in this. For those of you that know Isaiah 58, how do you know it? Where do we see it? Where do we read it? What are your highlights of it? And again, don't feel shame if you don't even know what I'm talking about. You can just listen for now or see what people post. But take a second. I think the chat is open. Someone post just, when do we read Isaiah 58? Is my Pittsburgh family really that shy? No one knows how to use the chat function? I'm going to make you work for your Torah learning, folks. I'm not going to do this alone. Yes, thank you, David Jaffe. I appreciate you. Yom Kippur morning. So it's not lost on me that when Rabbi Bardak invited me to do this, my head was in preparing for the High Holy Days, because we planned it so long ago. And I was like, okay, it'll be right after the holidays, so I'll teach my favorite text, Isaiah 58. I forgot how much time passes. It feels like the high holidays are so far away. And there's a reason we call this month the month of the Tree of Life experience, Mar Cheshvan, the bitter month of Cheshvan, because there are no holidays in it. Having been, with Rosh Hashanah, Slichot, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, Simchat Torah, we go through this kind of period of teshuvah, of atonement for all of our sins and our brokenness, and we literally stand before the open ark, giving our bodies and our souls to the Holy One on Yom Kippur, offering up in a potential end of our life, and then we rise up renewed with Sukkot and Simchat Torah. We get new life and we dance. And then we're stuck in Cheshvan with no holidays. And now we step back to commemorate the 3rd anniversary of Tree of Life. So here we are. But I want to savor a little bit of our high holiday learnings. So there's a great legend told about, oh, Katie, thank you. That's very helpful. There's a great legend told by Franz Kafka about Isaiah chapter 58. So for those that don't remember, every year on Yom Kippur morning, the rabbis, when we are fasting and praying, and we're more than halfway through our fast, so we're exhausted and just wondering how we're going to get through the rest of the day, which is ahead of us, they pick this text. And Kafka has a wonderful teaching about this text, which I'll share in a moment, but I want you to hear it echoing in your head while I do it. So I'm going to read it out loud so you can get a kind of a taste of it. So we're right where it says cry full throat, Katie, if you just scroll back up for just a second. There we go. And if you scroll, Katie, as I read, cry with full throat, without restraint, raise your voice like a ram's horn, declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sin. To be sure, they seek me daily. They're eager to learn my ways, like a nation that does what is right, that has not abandoned the laws of God. They ask me for the right way. They're eager for their nearness to God. Why then, they say, when we fasted, did you not see? When we starved our bodies, did you pay no heed? This is the question the Israelites are asking our ancestors. And this is the response from the prophet from Isaiah, but in the name of God. Because on your fast day, you see to your business and oppress all your laborers, because you fast in strife and contention, and you strike with a wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. Is such a fast I desire, a day for men to starve their bodies? Is it bowing like the head, like a bulrush, and lying in sackcloth and ash? Do you call that a fast? A day when Adonai is favorable? And then the text turns, and Isaiah says to us, no, this is the fast that I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness, to untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry, to take the wretched poor into your home, when you see the naked to clothe him, and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst through like the dawn. Your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator, meaning God who will champion you, then your vindicator, God, will march before you. The presence of the Holy One will be your rear guard. Then when you call out, then God will answer. When you cry, God will say, Hineni, here I am. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand and evil speech, and you offer your compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then shall your light shine in darkness, and your gloom shall be like noonday. God will guide you always. He will slake your thirst in parched places and give strength to your bones. You shall be like a watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. People from your midst shall rebuild ancient ruins. You shall restore the foundations long ago, and you shall be called, and I'm going to use a translation I like better here, the repairer of the breach, the restorer of dwelling places, the repairer of the breach. I'm going to pause there, Katie. Go up, bring back everybody's faces so we can see one another. And I want to share Kafka's take on this text, and then I want to get you all, again, I'm going to ask you to be posting and giving some responses so that we can be a little interactive here. Kafka said that on Yom Kippur in the Holy of Holies in the temple, when Isaiah burst into the sanctuary, interrupting, I mean, imagine the scene, right? I'm looking at my rabbi.
Just for the survivors and family members and anyone who needs to be seated because.
Sorry? Forgive me, do I need to pause?
I think you can go ahead.
Please continue. Please
Okay.
continue.
Okay. And again, cognizant that this teaching is in the context of folks healing and mourning, and grateful to be your teacher in it. Imagine to all these rabbis who are used to standing at the front of the room, and you've got 1,000 people and everybody is bowing and swaying and praying, right? It probably was not so dissimilar in the ancient temple. And in the middle of worship, Isaiah thunders from the back these words, interrupting everybody at worship. Everybody turns their heads and he thunders at them, what hypocrites you are, because you're asking for forgiveness, you're fasting, and yet there's hungry people in the streets. And Kafka famously said, it was as if a leopard had entered the sanctuary. It was as if a leopard entered the sanctuary, right? I mean, imagine the image. If you're in the middle of services and a leopard comes in and people will scream and what have you. And then Kafka teaches, and then the rabbis turned it into liturgy and it became irrelevant, right? Then the rabbis turned it into liturgy and it became irrelevant. Think about it for a second. Many of us in our shuls read Isaiah in Hebrew, and many of our folks don't even know what the words are. And even if we read it and translate in English or people know Hebrew, it's kind of recited. And therefore it loses the power of the accountability that the Holy One is calling for us, to actually stop and ask the question, to what extent is there a gap between the vision that we have for restoration, for repair, for healing, and the reality, not of what's happening out there, but our own lives, our own behaviors, the own ways in which we are complicit with folks who are suffering. So I want to invite people just to take a moment and take that in and hear Isaiah for the first time again. Whether you've heard Isaiah every year on Yom Kippur or in Bible study, or this is the first time, but that call to account that your prayers and fasts may be disconnected from the reality of the suffering and of the needs that are happening in the world. So let me ask you to post in the chat, what in Isaiah's words, what resonate with you? What speaks to you? What are you hearing differently this afternoon as we read these words? Now I'm going to pause and I'm going to let you think and take in Isaiah's words and let you post. Some courageous people put some words in the chat. Folks, you really don't, you're just, okay. Thank you, Susan Calson, for jumping in, and some others. Okay, thank you. Appreciate you. Ron Simon's posts, appreciating accountability to act righteously. Susan, and by the way, folks should know Susan leads the Squirrel Hill Health Center, so every day toils in the vineyard of actually bringing healing to the world and to people. Sippy, thank you for the reflection during fasting could lead to a change in our actions. And if it doesn't, then it becomes meaningless. Rabbi Diane, I hope I pronounced that right, Rabbi Diane, asking ourselves hard questions instead of just looking for easy answers to be able to move on. Casey says, looking out for neighbors, clothing the naked, etc. Today we come together in meaningful study, but so many other days we don't think about our community writ large coming together. So I want to link back for just a second into the real world, an offering of the way in which, at least for me, it resonates and lives in the world. So I call this Our Safeties and Our Solidarity from Squirrel Hill, and I painted a picture of the Soldiers and Sailors Hall gathering to Washington, D.C., where we're in the middle, and this is a strictly non-political, non-partisan Torah learning. And I am who I am, and I do what I do for a living. So I'm just going to share what I did today, whatever side of the political aisle you're on. I was at a press conference on Capitol Hill for the Build Back Better bill, trying to get Congress to do more to help people meet their immediate needs. In that legislation, there is significant work to help people have healthcare access, to have essential workers gain living wages, to have families have the ability to have parental leave when children are born, and a bunch of other provisions. So a group of faith leaders were gathered on Capitol Hill for a press conference to ask on demand of Congress to do more. And I did two things inside of that space. The first is I couldn't let the press conference start without pausing and acknowledging that today is the anniversary of the Tree of Life, and asking all of our faith leaders to gather and to dedicate our work, the call to help those who are needy, to help those who are poor, to help those who are ill, to help those who are homeless, be framed in terms of what we say when we say Zichronam Livracha. And I taught that phrase, and I had all of the faith leaders say Zichronam Livracha. I said, let the memory of our 11 who we lost live as a blessing in the world in the spirit of Isaiah, where their legacy will be a world in which more people experience wholeness and justice and compassion, where there's less hunger, where there's less suffering. And then I actually taught Isaiah 58, which is the original Build Back Better program, right? It's the assumption that the world as it is, as we experience it, is broken, that there are people who are suffering, and that needs to be righted. And again, whatever your own, there are probably reasonable people who can agree on different ways that you can get there from a policy perspective. So that's not what this is. But what it is about saying, how do we hear Isaiah today and say that our call to action is one in which the fasting and the praying, as people posted in the chat, leads us to take action in the world that will make sure all people have what they need from a hunger perspective, healthcare access, and housing. I think what was beautiful about the teaching for me was the way in which the faith leaders gathered and rallied and reaffirmed their commitment that in standing for the Jewish people, in acknowledging the reality of anti-Semitism and the targeting of Jews in the world, we are a solidarity movement that has to be not just about helping all people in some universal sense, but holding and supporting and protecting each marginalized community when it comes under attack, and in this case, the Jewish community, even as together we struggle to help all people and to transform the world into the world as it can be. I want to go back and walk people through a little bit more, and thank you, Judith, for the invocation against hypocrisy. Appreciate that as well. And David Jaffe, that there's work to do in the world, and the fasting and the ritual is not enough. The fasting and the ritual has to be combined with action. But let's go back. Katie, if you post the text again, I want to lift up a few key pieces that you can kind of take with you as you go on your journey forward. Right, and this is taken from Sepharia, and so forgive me for those who have sensitivity towards gender, the gendered language of the text. The Sepharia is just a beautiful online version, but there are some problematic aspects of the gender nature of the text, so I apologize for that. So scroll up, if you would, Katie, to the opening of 58. My own page has got a little bit of out of order. So I want to start just with the first couple of verses. Cry with full throat without restraint, raise your voice like a ram's horn. So I just want to underscore and lift up the high holiday theme, right? That Isaiah, the connection that the rabbis are making, it's not only about the ritual of fasting, but it's the notion that our voices have work to do in the world. I'm reminded of in the book of Proverbs, a wonderful, I think it's Proverbs 28, but one of the rabbis on the call will have to proof text me, which basically says, speak up, judge righteously, and stand with the poor. So the text combines a commitment to speaking out and promoting systems of justice with our obligation to the people who are the most needy, who suffer the most, i.e. standing with the poor. So of course, there isn't just the vocal call to action, but is the blast of the shofar, right? So the rabbis are connecting this day of shofarot with the blast of the shofar as the call to action. And of course, Isaiah is going to say it's not just the individual deeds and making yourself a better human, but it's the collective. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. And for those that don't remember, when we do the al chet, and again, I know we have various levels of Jewish literacy, al chet shechatanu lefanecha is the phrase we repeat over and over again throughout the High Holy Day liturgy, which says, forgive us, God, because we have sinned. So there's the collective transgression of the whole. There isn't just the individual. There is the need to do an individual confession of the individual sins, but the al chet shechatanu lefanecha is in the plural, purposely to say we have sinned and therefore we need to atone for our collective. And then, of course, Isaiah moves that into the collective, the people who have said we have transgressed and we are the house of Jacob, right? So this is now taking collective accountability as a society. Katie, if you go scroll up one page. And what's beautiful actually about the next set of verses is the assumption of goodwill that Isaiah, or God speaking through Isaiah, puts on humanity and on the Jewish people in particular, right? To be sure, they seek me daily, right? There's an assumption of piety. We are studying, right? As here we are in the Zoom, and what a beautiful Jewish way to mourn and to heal and to honor the memories that we've lost, which is study, right? And so there is this combination of daily prayer and daily study. And then this metaphor, it like a nation that is seeking to do what is right, that has not abandoned the laws of God, and they ask me for the right name. They want to be near me. And remember also, in Hebrew, The word for sacrifice, and back then in the temple that Isaiah interrupted, it was part of the sacrificial cult. So the Israelites, our ancestors, were bringing their sacrificial offerings, which are korbanot, korban taken from the Hebrew word lahakriv, which means to draw near. So Isaiah is reminding us that the Israelites, in gathering on Yom Kippur and gathering on the holiest of day, are bringing their offerings in order to draw near to God, right? So there's a beautiful statement about the authenticity and the sincerity, even when we are full of transgression, even when society is broken, even when we as individuals have erred, there's an assumption of goodwill that we are in the journey. So it's not that we shouldn't pray, it's not that we shouldn't fast, and it's not that we shouldn't study. It's that there may be a gap between our prayers, our study, and what we do in the world. And then literally putting words in our mouths, asking, why? When we fasted, didn't you see? Like, God, hello, we're right here. When we starved our bodies, did you pay no heed? And by the way, this echoes across generations. Anytime when we are in a moment of pain or loss or suffering, we echo this same cry, God, don't you see us? Don't you hear us? It reminds me of in the Exodus narrative, when the Israelites, when our ancestors are crying out in the suffering. And then it says, and God heard the cries of the Israelites, and God remembered the covenant. And of course, the logical, theological question all of us ask is, God, were you not listening? Did you forget the covenant? And there is a notion that in some ways, God only gets activated, what is the divine in the universe, with a human cry. So somehow it is the cry of the Israelites who are saying, God, don't you see us? We want to be right with you. We want to be following. And the cry of Isaiah, the cry of hypocrisy, that until you have the calling out, there can be no healing. Hence it is with the proverb I quoted, right? Speak out, do justice, stand with the poor. Until there is some kind of audible cry, a call to action, a call to accounting, there can be no healing, there can be no restoration. Okay? And then, of course, is the response, because on the day of your fast, you see to your business and oppress your workers. So Isaiah is literally calling out the hypocrisy between those who are at prayer, who are authentically seeking to reconnect to God, but whose business practices oppress workers. And fasting in strife and contention, striking with a wicked fist. Meaning, if you Jews are fighting amongst yourselves, there can be no actual authenticity to the prayers for healing. And you folks may know the Mishnah is very clear on this, which teaches us that once you show up for High Holy Days, for Yom Kippur, it's about prayers for healing with God. Teshuvah, repentance for things that you have done against God. Things that we have done against other humans have to have been resolved before we walk in the door, right? So like when we are in conflict with other humans, we have to resolve those conflicts and ask for forgiveness before the day of awe, before Yom Kippur. And Isaiah takes this to a social level. Don't come in the door on Yom Kippur while people are starving, while people are homeless, and think that you're going to restore your relationship with God. Get back out there and fix that human contention and strife in order that you, in so doing, will be able to return to God. This will, as Isaiah then says, make your voice heard on high. Okay? Katie, why don't we scroll up another page? And then, of course, this is what may be the most famous that you hopefully have heard echoing, and I hope you'll hear renewed and differently with Franz Kafka in your head, like hear it like a leopard gnashing its teeth and roaring its roar. Is this the fast that I desire? Is this what God wants, right? A day for people to starve their bodies, to bow our heads like a bulrush, lying in sackcloth and ash? Do you call that a fast? A day when God is favorable, meaning will hear our prayers? And by the way, there's a total misunderstanding of this text, particularly in the Reform Jewish movement, that it's a rejection of ritual, right? There's a lot of people who make the oversimplistic interpretation that say, therefore, don't fast, therefore, don't pray, therefore, don't study. That is not what this text that I see is saying, right? The text is saying you should be fasting, you should be praying, and you should be learning, but in service of the work in the world that has to happen. In fact, the work in the world should have happened as a necessary precondition in order to be able to have your prayers heard or your fast be meaningful, right? Hoping this is making sense for folks. And then Isaiah lays out the program. No, this is the fast that I desire. So now speaking, on God's behalf, the fast that God wants is the fast of unlocking the fetters of wickedness, untying the cords of the yoke. Meaning, if you literally picture what was a great ancient Near Eastern image, right, of cattle who are yoked. So it's a metaphor for all those who are oppressed, all those who are enslaved, or who are caught up in whatever it is, the vice of poverty, debt, slavery, hunger, vulnerability. And remember the repeated phrase over and over again in the biblical text: you were slaves in Egypt, therefore you should be for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, right? The categories of the most vulnerable. So the breaking off the yoke is the image for the person who is in that category of vulnerability. They're poor, they're a widow, they're an orphan, they're a migrant, and therefore we have to release them from those forms of oppression. Let the oppressed go free and break off every yoke. And I think the text is being very intentional here of saying break off every yoke. Don't overread this as literally like people who are yoked, but every form of oppression, the ways in which humans wind up trapped, again, whether it's because of poverty, because they're a migrant, a refugee, and keenly aware in teaching this text, the Dor Hadash had been a congregation that had been working on being hospitable to refugees and migrants, right? To try and live out this teaching from Isaiah in the form of relieving the oppression of those who are migrants or refugees. All right, Katie, let's advance. And I'm going to teach to the end of the text, and then I'll leave about 10 minutes for just questions or comments. It is to share your bread with the hungry, to take the wretched poor into your home, to clothe the naked, and not to ignore your own kin. And by the way, there's some debate. Does that mean we only kin, meaning those who are direct to you, or the whole human kin? I'll leave that to people. Obviously, I land on this as a more universalist than as a Jewish particularist. You can interpret as you wish, but certainly seeing people who are hungry and homeless. And now what I want to get to in the couple of minutes before I open it up for some conversation and questions, I want to teach against part of this text that is, I think, often misunderstood as a call to direct action. I think it is a call to direct action. Many of your synagogues, maybe, I'm sure the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh, I'm sure many of your communities and congregations do direct service program, right? Soup kitchen work. Many of you may have homeless shelters that you work with, do coat drives, all of that, literacy, tutoring, all of that is critical. But as I teach to the end of the last few verses, I want to suggest that Isaiah is actually pointing us in something more ultimate, something more, to use jargon, systemic. In other words, a world in which there is no hunger, a society in which people don't go homeless. Because he doesn't stop here and just say, when you see naked people, clothe them, or just take people into your house. Look at the picture that Isaiah paints and stay with me around this vision of something ultimate, okay? Something more systemic, a society in which people aren't suffering at all. He says, then your light shall burst through like the dawn. Your healing shall come up quickly, your vindicator. And the Hebrew is tzidkacha. So if you're looking at the Hebrew, vindicator is a terrible translation. Tzedek is the root of the word tzidkacha. Your source of justice. Okay, so if you swap out from vindicator, your source of justice, I think it makes my point even more strongly. Then your source of justice shall march before you, and the presence of God shall be your rear guard. Isaiah's pointing us in the direction of there will be this kind of bubble of righteousness, of justice that you are building around you. And when you call out, God will answer. When you cry, God will say, Hineni. Here I am, using the same word we often use when God calls us, right? From Abraham on forward, we humans say, Hineni. Now God is saying to us, I am here for you. And I want to suggest this isn't like the transcendent God who is apart from, but rather the God that is immanent, that dwells among us. In other words, it would be divine and godlike if we dwelt in a world of justice, of tzedkacha, of tzedek, in which there weren't hunger or homelessness. That would be God. That would be the divine, if we banish the yoke from our midst and the menacing hand and evil speech. Katie, scroll up, because now he really drives it home. Watch what he does here. In offering our compassion to the hungry and satisfying the famished creature, then shall your light shine in darkness, and your gloom shall be like noonday. Think about the juxtaposition here between the days of darkness, of hopelessness, of fear, and of trial, to days of light and noonday, right? This is what I was alluding to at the beginning of the shiur around a Shabbat, a day that feels at peace, whole, with our light shining forth like the dawn, okay? And again, building up towards it, then God will guide you always. Like, so you don't have to worry about crying out, God, where are you? Because God is right there guiding us. And then think about this image. God will slake your thirst in parched places. Great prophetic text. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Torah is paralleled often in our text to water. There's something much more ultimate here than just saying people won't be thirsty anymore. Okay, in a world that is parched with oppression, it will be overflowing with the waters of justice. And our bones, and I don't think Isaiah here means like these bones, I'm pointing to my body, the bones of the society, the bones of the community, the bones of the people, the collective will be strong. In other words, we as a collective will gain strength and will be like a watered garden, like a spring that looks like the Garden of Eden to me, people. That's why I'm saying this is something more ultimate than just a soup kitchen, right? This is a world of plenty. It's Adam and Eve walking around the garden who don't have to till into 10 because there is what is needed. And we've brought that on, God is saying. When you do these things, you will have built a garden, and that garden will have a spring that never fails and an unlimited amount of food to feed our bones. And then the wind up, and you'll forgive me for using my translation, which I like better. People from your midst will rebuild ancient ruins, that which is broken, that which is destroyed, whether it's the ancient temple, whether it's renewing the tree of life building and its 3 congregations that dwell within, whether it's rebuilding a society in which people are sleeping in the streets, whether it's rebuilding the nation's capital after an insurrection and a mob, right? We will be the people through our actions and our deeds who restore the foundations of long ago, all the way back to the garden, to that time of perfection. And we will be called the repairers of the breach. The repairers of the breach. This is tikkun olam at its best. The notion that the world was perfect, it was whole, it was divine, it was God, but in the creation, in the shattering, brokenness spread throughout the universe. There's pain, there is suffering. And if we do the work, if we bring humans back together, then we will be the repairers of the breach. One final thing, my final kind of closing gift for this day of remembrance, scroll up. And then we get a seeming non sequitur. Isaiah's not done. Isaiah says, by the way, if you're not going to just do all of this stuff that is social justice-y, you're also going to do the spiritual thing, which is you're going to not trample on the Shabbat anymore. You're not going to pursue business on my holy day, the day of Shabbat. If you call Shabbat a delight, if God's holy day is honored and you don't strike bargains, then this will all happen. Why add Shabbat at the end? First of all, to remind us, we need ritual, we need prayer, we need study. It's not just about activism and social justice. It's not just about feeding people and building a society of justice for all people. It's also about praying and studying and gathering and singing songs and eating a Shabbos meal, because that's where we taste the world to come. That's where we experience a world of wholeness and justice and peace. That's where we feel what it is to be repaired, to be that watered garden whose spring never fails, the world in which no one is hungry, in which no one suffers. That's, I think, what Isaiah is calling us to. And that world is, as one, a Jewish world, but it is a world that we share with our Christian neighbors, with our Muslim neighbors, with people of all faiths and people with no faiths. And that's what I saw when I went to Soldiers and Sailors Hall. The way the Muslim community leader and the Black Christian leader both stood up and spoke in solidarity of this community to say, we will be with you. We will water your garden. We will strengthen your bones. We will protect you, because we believe that in building our safety, in our solidarity, collectively, we can be the repairers of the breach. With that, I'm going to stop talking. And Katie or Rabbi Bardak, I give it over to you if there are folks that want to ask questions, make comments. or just share reflections, the floor is open.
I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Carolyn Linder, who's hosting the session
Forgive
to
me.
moderate for another 5 minutes. Yeah.
Carolyn, nice to meet you. Thank you for your leadership, and I apologize
Likewise.
not
Thank
recognizing
you.
you.
Thank you for being here. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to interject anything, or if you would prefer, you may place your comment in the chat.
What I took from this amazing teaching is that a just society is a happy society. And if you live within a just society, you will be happy. And then Shabbat will have meaning. So thank you.
Okay, if there's no one else that would like to share at this time, I would like to thank Rabbi Pesner for your teaching today. I want to thank Katie Matoski, my colleague, for all of her assistance with the tech support, and to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. We will be closing with Kaddish de Rabbanan, led by Anthony Feinberg, in memory of his mother, Joyce Feinberg, who was killed in the attack. Anthony will share some words about the Kaddish and recite it with an in-person minyan. A link to the text will be in the chat. And please rise if you're able.
So there are several forms of the Kaddish prayer. The actual text varies according slightly to your tradition, but all are praise for God, said in the presence of a quorum of 10, which is a minyan, of which the constitution, depends on your tradition, by those mourning a close relative, the exact timing following the date of passing depends on your tradition, or on the Hebrew anniversary of passing Yortzeit. This rabbi's Kaddish is a prayer in Aramaic that is already recited at least once during morning, Shacharit, and Shabbat or festival afternoon, Musaf services. Different from all the other Kaddish prayers because it is said after a Torah lesson, such as the one we've just witnessed, or other Jewish texts, both of which can be independent of an actual religious service. Depending on your tradition, Kaddish prayers are one of the three unique opportunities to elevate the departed soul, which by definition can no longer perform good deeds. Mitzvot, like prayers. Kaddish Rabbanan is actually a two-form, study and prayer. The third way to honor the departed being through performing charity tzedakah. Also, depending on your tradition, the recitation of the Kaddish prayers is not strictly limited to mourners. As you will see, I've been able to gather 10 people with me to form a minyan. So please join me in reciting the Ashkenazi or Eastern European origin version, be it the German or Polish variant that you see on the screen in front of you. Yiskada, Yiskadash, Rabbi. Yalmad Ibrah Hussein, Yamit Hussein, the Hayahon of Mechon, Chayed Beit Israel. Bagala Bisman Karibi, Bru Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabba, Barak, Leolam, Alamei Amaya. Yisbarach, Bishtabach, Bisbar, Bishraman, Bisnase, Bisadar, Bisale, Bisalal, Shmei Kudusha, Barichu, Leelamin, Kol Berchasa, Bishirasa, Tush Bechasa, Benechamasa, Damiran Bialmavi, and Amen. Ad Israel, Rabbanan, Bial Tamideon, Bial Kol Tamidehon, Bial Kol Madaskin Boyraita, Divra Atar, Hade Veti, Vatol, Atar Viatar, Yehe Lahon, Shlama Rabba. Hina v'chizda v'chaim v'chayim arichim uzmonei revichei ופרקנן מן כאדם ובהון די ושמיא והרב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מן שמיא, ואחים טובים עלינו והכל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו והכל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon and wishing you a peaceful day.